Elite performance comes from being fully immersed in the process, aka being in the moment, dialed in, or in the zone. But the challenge is the external scoreboards of sport and life that can consume our focus and distract our attention from the process. I'm Dr. Cassie Preston, a mental performance coach and founder of CP Mindset. And today we're going to talk about how to develop your personal scorecard so that you can stop being consumed by the external scoreboards and stay consistently dialed in to your process. We all know the cliche, focus on what you can control. But the problem is that it's a lot easier said than done. In fact, the root cause for most mental blocks stems from getting caught up in society's definition of success or those external scoreboards. You struggle with confidence, you probably tie your confidence to results. You get nervous, you probably are worried about results. And you struggle with resilience, then you probably beat yourself up after negative results. To make matters worse, it's hard to escape the external scoreboards. There is literally massive signs with bright lights in your face all game. And our society obsesses over them. They are interweaved in our conversations, and social media amplifies this noise and it layers in additional external comparisons. But if you develop and utilize the personal scorecard I'm going to show you today, you will learn to focus on the things within your control, be immersed in the process, and achieve consistent elite performance. Okay, so specifically, we're going to cover 3 steps to develop your personal scorecard. First, it's what to score. We got to know what we're measuring, we're tracking, what we're focused on. And then 2 is how to score it. There's some unique takeaways, important concepts there that will help you make that personal scorecard much more effective. And lastly, I want to make sure you know how to get the most out of it, some of the do's and don'ts and some bonus tips in there as well. Now, before we dive in, just a reminder to like, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. And if you're interested in any mental performance coaching programs, one-on-one for yourself or your teams, reach out, find out more at cpmindset.com. All right, let's dive in with step 1, what to score, because what we measure matters. What we're reflecting on matters. And a way to think about this too, in this personal scorecard, we often call it a reflection process. But the idea here is there's 4 big categories, and we want to focus on 2 of them, particularly in this personal scorecard. And that is the mental state and process. And just to make it clear, your mental state, which is your ability to trust yourself, be present, be in the moment, we're going to want to have that well defined, because that leads to how you execute your process. Everybody talks about play your game, focus on what you can control. Well, what is that? What are the specific things here? And we want to have those well defined, because then they lead to KPIs. If you don't know what a KPI means, it's simply just a little acronym for key performance indicators. So they're like the stats within the game itself. So it could be like plays made, touches, greens and regulation, those kind of things, which lead to, and if you're doing those things well, it leads to the main results, like points or winning percentage or, money, contracts, getting to the next level, etc. And so clearly there's this degree within here. And one of the ways I want to frame this is the most in your control. And then there's this continuum, and over here is the least in your control. You influence it, and sometimes you have little or a lot of influence depending on various factors, but you have the least control over here. And so where do we want to be immersed? As I alluded to at the beginning, the process and your mental state. And so I like to draw this nice big line down the middle, and I want your focus, your personal scoreboard, to be huge on the left side here, mental state, process. But those need to be now clearly defined, and they need to be measured and tracked and reinforced. And this is, again, important because that's where, and it leads to results, but it's not the why either. And there's a whole, side part to that I'll get in part 3. And then the other thing to understand is, results aren't a bad thing to be aware of and be mindful of. They can be great forms of feedback, right? Particularly, it's better to focus on KPIs as a form of feedback because it's more within your control. It's a feedback to how you're doing at your process. But the idea is what we're scoring, and the main 2 things, your mental state. I'm going to go into what that means and how to do it in a second. And 2, your process. It's what you execute, what it actually looks like while you're performing or playing in your sport or field of play. So that's the idea. It's a nice way to understand. We want to track and reinforce and focus on mental state, process, not the main results. All right, so let's dive into number 2 now, how to score it. So the 2 things, mental state and process, I'm going to take a slide for each. when we're thinking mental state, I want you to simply think about what is your mental state. We do this in any video. We definitely do this in our programs. We do this. We often use the alter ego concept, and which simply means identifying what does it mean for you to be in the zone and what does it mean for you to be in your own head. And then drawing that up or identifying a couple different traits within it. So for an example, it might be like, oh, on this side, on my zone, in the zone, you own your capabilities. All right. Versus when you're in your own head, you are full of doubt and worry, etc. And so then this becomes something you actually measure. What percentage of the time am I owning it? Oh, I'm at like 70%. That's the question. That's the thing you score yourself on. That's how we assess our mental game. And clearly, and just to be clear, this is highly within your control. And the goal is to hit 95s, not be perfect, but doing your best, being fully committed to just owning it. No excuses, not getting derailed, not getting distracted. And so that's one example. You could pick a couple other ones where maybe it's like enjoying the game for the sake of itself, right? So enjoying the game, just playing, enjoying the process of the game versus consumed by results, right? And we're talking about your personal scorecards will actually help you do this one better. But again, put a number to it. And now all these mental state parts of being in the zone versus being in your own head, they're always going to be related. And we create an alter ego with an athlete or a high performer. They're all interconnected, but it's knowing which ones matter for you. What are you working on? What matters? What are your priorities, particularly first and foremost to a mental state? And now that that's clarified, and then you measure and track it, it's now your personal scorecard. It becomes really important for you to consistently showing up at your best and performing well. It helps keep you going in the right direction. Now, the second big thing to score here is your process. A lot of people say, oh, I got to go play my game. Well, what is it? What are the different situations? And then what do you execute or do in those situations? And you want to pick like 5 max. The other one, you want to pick about 3 max for mental state. Here's 5 max, but you could even put 3. And for mental state, you can even just have 1 question. But the idea is within each is like, how do you actually score it? So I'll use a hockey example, a forward or player that wants to, when they have the puck, take their space, be aware, trust themselves, be in attack mode, and go out there and impose their will and make plays. And so whatever it is for you, now you can track, okay, well, let's say I had 10 touches in a game in the offensive zone. Well, how many did I do well? Well, maybe it was 7 well, 2 I did meh. I did okay. It wasn't quite to my standard. And the key word there is standard. So well is to your standard. And I like to use the words, did I, when I had the puck, did I execute my process to my standard, or for short, EPS? I like the I think it's a cool little analogy, but did I execute my process to my standard? I did 7 out of 10 would be this example. And there's one actually no. Now, no could be for various reasons, but what I usually indicate and like you to and encourage you to reflect on is a no often means you weren't in the right mental state. Because if you're like, oh, I was way off my process to my standard versus like, I just fell short because, well, hockey's hard. Sports are difficult. The skill you're working on, reflecting on is challenging. So sometimes it's like, oh, did it okay, but not quite to my process, to my standard. Well, then indicate it as such. And so the whole idea is obviously we're trying to get more on the well, but I want to make sure you see this as a learning opportunity over here. Okay, learning opportunity, particularly a mental learning opportunity. It's not a bad thing. It's just a result. It happens to the best players in the world. Often, sometimes athletes have a hard time resetting, staying centered, dealing with adversity when they make these big mistakes. I'll call them a big mistake, or, oh, I can't make that mistake, that idea. But it happens. And so we want to make sure to accept it, let it go. But also understanding if they're happening a lot, that probably go back to the other side. It's the mental state we got to work on. Okay. So that's one thing that's important with this. But the other thing that I want to make very clear, because most people, and you are therefore highly likely to maybe making this mistake already, is you're measuring the result, not the process. So a way to look at that, these 7 plays well, if you did it, it's about the process. So I was aware, I took my space, I went fast, I was trusting my instincts and attacking. Well, how many of them worked and actually was a positive result to play, created a chance, etc.? Well, it might have only been 7 check marks, and it was actually 1 didn't work, bad bounce. But it's usually going to be a pretty high ratio to that side. And obviously the no, if you had done 10, not well, it's way more likely to be the X didn't work out and then it working out. But the middle ones, which are interesting, sometimes you do an okay job. You could get lucky. One went your way and one didn't go your way. But we're not measuring the result. Chances made, those would be the KPIs, key performance indicator. The results, the positive touches with the puck or the situation that you're measuring. We're not measuring that. How did I do it? My process, the things within my control or more within my control, being aware, taking space, creating space, moving my feet, whatever it is for your sport and the situation you're in. And again, you want to have about five things here that are within your control that you're working on, and five tops, because you could probably pick 10, 15, 20. That's overwhelming. Fives max. And then that's your game, the things that you're working on. You can tweak, these can change over time, but this is what we're talking about when you're creating your own personal scorecard and how to score the process side. Let's dive in now to getting the most out of it. And the way to think about this is there's no point in doing steps 1 and 2, creating this personal scorecard, and not being aware and doing some of these key other additional details. First of which are to what to do and not do. And one of the most important ones not to do is keep looking and getting obsessed with the external scoreboards. Do not go check your stats all the time. Do not stare into the scoreboard online or the scoreboard on at the game, etc. Staring into the stands all the time. Stop. Like, what we input into our mind is going to dictate the output in the mental state. So that's why the personal scorecard is a great source of input. So it's doing it consistently really matters. So, but doing this can really ruin it. If you're like checking, lots of junior hockey players or various sports where they're checking stuff online, they're on social media all the time, checking how everybody else is doing. All of that is you're getting consumed again with the external scoreboard. No, focus on your personal scorecard instead. The other big do though is, what are 5 things I did well today? An easy thing to add to your personal scorecard. We use this, we have to call it our reflection process. But the premise is reinforce the things you're doing well, because most elite athletes and people are too hard on themselves. We're overly focused on what's not going well. How do we get better? What we didn't do well that day. Taking the time to reflect on what you did well, owning your wins, is a very healthy thing that helps you get the most out of your consistent growth in any area of life. And it makes this personal scorecard that much more meaningful too. Okay. Personalize it, gives some context outside of just some numbers and reflection. Now, the other thing here I talked about is bonus tools. And what I mean by that is there's tons of other things that we can do, but simply creating even checklists within the scorecard. Okay. Did I use my reset routine today? We've talked about that in other videos. That's obviously a big part of the programs we have. You want to maybe have that in there. Did I use my reset routine? Reset routine is something you want to be doing at the start of every practice and or game and throughout to keep us centered and block out noise. It could also be the use of imagery. Are you doing imagery and setting your intention for how you want to show up, and your mental state and coping and being prepared to cope with stressors or distractions? And then other more simple things can be like sleep, tracking your sleep in here. Am I sleeping well? How's my nutrition? How's my phone use doing? So those are just simple, more checklist items. And the other big one and bonus tool that I would encourage, and especially goes to blocking out the scoreboard, and I was alluding to it earlier, from society's definitions, are you connecting to your why? And the way that we do that often, we do a concept from Alter Ego and Todd Herman's work called the origin story, but it's reconnect. When do you first fall in love with the game, your sport, and connecting to intrinsic drivers? And so another way that you can do this as well, outside of developing that origin story, is also even just like, hey, did I get to that feeling today? Did I enjoy the experience? Versus was I just about, my only enjoyment was results? No, I want you to think about yourself as like a painter. And what does a great painter do? A great painter doesn't just do it, and their why is not just to make money. You won't probably be a great painter. A great painter is their why. They love creating the art and the experience. And what happens? The result is they can make money, and they'll become a better painter when they have that as their why. It doesn't mean you can't have goals and intentions to achieve things and climb the ranks and get those outcomes, but your why stays connected to the love of the game and the experience. And so having questions as a checkpoint for that, another great little bonus thing to create this personal scorecard to make that much more meaningful. Now, the last and important but obvious thing is to iterate. This is not a done deal. Do it once, it's done. No, you got to keep doing it. You got to keep reflecting. You got to keep filling out the scorecard and keep changing the questions, the mental state questions, update them. Get a coach, use somebody, a parent, an actual coach, a teammate, a mental performance coach at CP Mindset for sure, a little self plug. But the idea is getting that feedback and iterating and personalizing matters. It's not a one time and done. And what's also within that is, adjusting it and repeatedly doing it. Because as you do it more, you'll be like, okay, I need this question anymore. I'm over that. Let's add this. So keep it simple. Okay. We're not trying to overcomplicate this personal scorecard, but you want to identify what are the things that matter to me most. Definitely be doing those first two that I talked about with mental state and process, add in some of these extra bonus tools, add in the 5 things I do well. That's how you're going to get the most out of that personal scorecard. All right. To summarize, that is how you create your own personal scoreboard. You first have to know what to score, mental state and process. Second, know how to score it, and then use some of those bonus tools and get the most out of this personal scoreboard by using it consistently. The key to this, again, is being able to block out, not get caught up and consumed by the external scoreboards that are consumed by results in our society. Instead, get dialed in onto what matters so you can show up consistently at your best and present in the moment. This is key for achieving consistently performance. Please like, comment, share. If you have any questions, reach out. And if you're interested in mental performance coaching, you can find out more at cpmindset.com. We'll see you in the next video.